responses on our work, and well, some really strange synergies. After my personal experiences, I had to consult a psychologist for a while. I had a few sessions during my crisis, and it's kind of interesting that she's actually a specialist in post-traumatic stress with victims from torture.
Wow.
So, and I'm actually starting to see if I can contact her again and maybe present her with some of the stuff that you've been working on. So, see if I can't maybe create some synergies and well, get the whole theme spread over here too. So.
Well, when did you go through your problems, issues?
Okay, well, we can touch upon that for.
No, it's not being nosy. Is it recently?
No, it's not. It's not. It's just that I didn't want to. Go into that because that would seem, at least in the general interview stuff, that would seem as if I was trying to infringe upon your theme. But I've actually had a very strange relationship with my ex-wife, and there's a lot of things that actually hints at the fact that she might have had psychopathic tendencies. So, and that's just something that I didn't realize until, well, recently.
Well, nobody ever does. Nobody. Tell you something interesting on a related note. I've been talking to a friend, an Irish friend who lives in America. He's a musician, and he's breaking. You know, his relationship is breaking up as well. And he's been drawing trees constantly, and it's funny. Like about 2 years ago, I went through a bit of an emotional crisis myself, and I kept drawing trees and stuff. I'm just trying to figure out why a tree. You know, it's interesting, isn't it? Maybe new growth or something.
Yeah. Usually, I would have expected it to be something about planting a tree, or a tree losing its leaves or something like that.
It's funny you said. Hold on. I'm working on this one at the moment, and you can see it there.
Ooh, classic spirals.
Yeah, and the tree has no leaves, which is interesting too. You know, it's funny that you just said that. You know.
Yeah, because that's the transition of winter, really, right?
Yeah.
Death and rebirth. And I noticed that you left one branch kind of spiraling by itself.
It's spiraling into the distance, you know.
Yeah, and it's a new branch.
Almost like a whip, you know.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the association for you, the whole spinning things, spiraling new motions. As you said, you used the word whip yourself. You are spinning yourself in there, out in the world, and you've placed it in kind of the center of the picture, according to the golden ratio.
Yeah.
So it's the key event in the picture. It's the spiral. So it seems as if it's actually what you're saying about yourself.
Could be, yeah. I don't pre-plan anything. I just let it happen, kind of thing.
Well, it's kind of amazing about the whole interpretation of dreams, that and creativity. You have no control over it. And
No.
when people say, well, this can mean this and that, and then you say, no. But you can't really say no, because whether you are aware of what you are saying with your art or not, it is being said. There is always a reason for choosing things like that. Your subconscious will be very aware of making sure that things have more than one meaning.
Yeah.
It's just a fascinating topic, the whole dream interpretation and symbolism. It's just.
And as soon as you put a sort of a technical framework on it, in terms of a sort of what's the word? A process, a technical process in terms of quantifying.
But it's not quantifiable because it's
no longer creative. It's a machine. Then it's interesting.
Yeah, but it's not. The subconscious is more like a channel. It's like.
Take it out. Yeah.
It's when you choose what words to use, right?
Yeah, I'm listening. Go ahead.
Well,
sorry.
In conversation, if you are expressing yourself, of course you can express yourself by automation, right? Using catchphrases and words that fall naturally. Call it autopilot. But you can also consciously decide which words to use, right? And then there's the layer beneath both of those, that's subconscious, where it's what is traditionally in psychology called a Freudian slip, right? That's kind of the one that everyone knows, but it's funny. I saw a clip today. It's strange how I always get into those ellipses, with Alex Jones being interviewed about the gay sexuality at the Bohemian Grove,
Right.
And he said that he was saying to the journalist that soon they will publish what have been their secret annals. That's so much. That's so much a subtle choice of words.
Oh, right? Yes. Oh yes. I was thinking about somebody. I was reading this. Someone posted a news story the other day about some American politician who's running for president on the conservative side, and the exact same thing happened. They said, she said, gay lifestyle is just submission to bondage and despair. I mean, you just couldn't make that stuff up.
And this is what I mean about the fact that these layers, right? This it's kind of like a game with your own mind. It's your conscious layer, your automated unconscious, and then subconscious layer. I think one of the things that is not very well described in the traditional psychology is the fact that you have a personal subconscious, and then you have a collective subconscious layer. And the two are kind of different, but very much the same in that they are not conscious. And it's always a game that goes on between all of that. And then when people are communicating, there's so much going on, synchronicity wise, synergy wise. It's just it never gets boring to me, really.
And that's before we even get into like the sort of physiological aspects of things like body language, and even things like the theory of interactive alignment, where brainwave patterns of two people who are in agreement will actually start to synchronize after a while. So it's absolutely fascinating stuff.
And the book that I also mentioned in our interview, the book by Jung about synchronicity, it is so weird, because whether or not that is a physical fact in the real world, whether or not something is predetermined or fate or kismet or whatever you call it, the fact that you interpret it as that is key, because that's going to change your whole attitude towards the situation.
Well, that's the birthing moment. It meant nothing until you recognized the synchronicity. Then it became what it became, which I find that even fascinating. This was the spark that led to this synchronistic association. But did it exist before that? That's to me, that moment it's almost like, well, then, bam, a new reality has been created from that point on.
And this kind of inspires me to mention. I know that you must have seen these Terence McKenna and Sheridan, where they are interviewing or they are having a dialogue in Prague, where they are talking about what's called the 0 point, the point in the future that's drawing reality towards it. And this is very much on the same topic. I know that it sounds as if I'm segueing, but because you notice...
Is that the same thing as the time wave zero?
Kind of. His
where reality is spiraling like a clock spring into a sort of a pivotal moment.
Yeah, and it's his work with the I Ching, where he created this software that shows these patterns, and then he's analyzing it. He's using a computer to read tea leaves, and then he's doing prophecy. But the really important thing is what you related about synchronicity, about the fact that when you see patterns in a relation with someone, or in knowledge that you come about, because you see that pattern, you fill it out. You realize that pattern because it changes your behavior. So that means that a pattern that is not yet formed, that you are creating in your mind, is then being realized. You are actualizing the pattern that was not maybe there at all, but because you believe that it's there, then you will act on it, and then it becomes real.
Yeah.
And that is kind of what Terence McKenna is talking about when he's saying that there's a point in the future at the end of time that's pulling humanity towards it. This is like a common vision that all human beings have. We kind of, by consensus, we move towards a common goal, and because it's something we all want, then that becomes like a potential point that's pulling us towards it.
Yes.
And it's so weird, because all these things, when I saw it, it didn't make sense. And this is what I mean about the weird synchronicity about stumbling upon your work, because your work has really sparked a lot of thinking in these areas that I didn't really know how to put together. And suddenly it just becomes so easy. It's as if I hadn't sorted the pieces of the puzzle right. I had the blues with the greens or something like that, and now they're just coming together, all of them. All these things that I didn't understand before. It's really spacey.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that's worked for you. That's the idea too. My own work was a discovery of information, and I wouldn't say it was suppressed, but it certainly wasn't easy to find.
But it's just what I think you've done for me is you have taken psychology and the human condition out of the hands of the quackademics.
Yeah. Well, that's what I wanted to do. This stuff should not be academic. This is like saying human biology should be academic, or spirituality should be academic. These things are intrinsic to all of us. We all have a right to express and work with them in ourselves. And this to me is like, it's almost like the way they want to it's almost like a sort of an intellectual taxation system or something, where something that you should enjoy for free, explore for free, is then handed over to a third party who can guide you through that. It's kind of like this. It's just the same approach as religion. You have religion or spirituality. You don't need the middlemen. You need the teachers. You need the prophets, the groundbreakers, the people who can probably stitch these threads together. But once you have the underlying aspects of what's happening, then you work upon it yourself, and that's what I wanted to get across. This is your journey. Okay, this is not. This is your personal journey that you have to take, and it's a road to discovery, and it's something it's something that you cannot do with another person. You have to do it yourself, and you don't have the map, but you're an explorer. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah,
And
but
that exploration is the journey.
but do you see that what you have actually started now in your own little way? I know that it can sound a little bit too large, right? When people in entertainment and creative people were disclosing these things in myth and in movies and books, right? People like Harris and his Hannibal Lecter series, and Bret Easton Ellis with American Psycho. All these examples of trying to describe this phenomenon, right? It was either entertainment or academic. There was nothing in between. What you have basically done is taken it out of that narrative, and you're saying to people, well, it does not belong in either of those. They belong in the real world.
Yeah,
in
definitely.
your life.
Yep.
That's really fucking novel. It's extreme because it is not a piece of entertainment, and it's not an academic materialistic attempt of cutting into something and reducing it to some mechanics. It's about rediscovering what I might call the roots, the pagan roots.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, because that's exactly what I was trying to do. I just wanted to demystify and create a matter-of-fact approach to something that really should be in everybody's life and should not be something they should have to discover. At first, it should be always there, and then they can go on their journey of discovery. So I take you're reading the book. Are you enjoying the book?
I am enjoying it, and what I really like is again, it's the source that's my main point. It's what really inspires me, the fact that you are doing this as a self-taught person, as a layman, and well, as you know, the whole idea with Soul United is to share all this contained and controlled knowledge, and giving people the power back, getting them to start working on critical thinking and about do it yourself in every way, giving them tools to be totally liberal, totally liberated from any dependency of any kind. And you are just the most clear example of this, because you are so specialized, because you focus on this this detail in what I call academics, right? You've taken it from them. They do not own it anymore. And the number of times I've heard people trying to, usually when there's a new movie out or a new series, then some psychiatrist or psychologist starts blabbering about what a psychopath is, and they get into all this psychopath, sociopath, blah blah blah, and it all becomes nomenclature. So it has no.
There is also an attempt to trivialize it as well. There's books written by people who've been dumped in relationships. Maybe they've been with psychopaths, maybe they haven't. Some certainly have, some of the ones I've read, but some of them I'm dubious about. And there's one particular series of books that's produced by this person who the covers of the books are quirky and cartoonish, and they look like the Flintstones or the Jetsons. And it's all about how it's all, we're talking about one of the most hidden psychological holocausts in society, and this person has written a book to make it seem like a bad date. And could you imagine if we approach pedophilia, rape, or even slavery the same way? And so I do see the sort of like a need to trivialize this stuff now. That's the new thing now. And so now that the cat's out of the bag and people like myself and a few others are like, grabbing this stuff out of the marbled halls of academia and running down the street like waving it like this sort of manifesto to the masses, I've noticed there's now a specific sort of like thrust to make it not seem so bad. One particular individual has written a book where he basically says, "Oh well, psychopaths exist, but they're very rare, and they're not as many as you think they are." And it's all to deflect from your notion that you're dealing with psychopathic leaders. And this guy is a well-known sort of alternative journalist, which is essentially a mainstream journalist who is the sort of state-sanctioned version of alternative viewpoints. I'm talking about a Michael Moore type. And this is something they've tried quite recently, and it's flopped. And the books have come across as glib and infantile, and they've been getting pretty poor reviews, except by the sort of same corporate media he works for. And so it's good. I really do feel like we have them by the balls here. I really do with this stuff. Because suddenly we have something that's an actual, tangible, quantified, validated and peer-reviewed science that we can actually hold back at them and say, okay, debunk this, and they can't.
This is key. This is so vital to me, because you are the second example I get from from Avalon, from the British Isles, about getting back to the roots and taking control of information and authority, or false authority. The first one is really a funny story, and I really want to share it with you because it just shows in a totally different way what it is I see you doing. Here in Denmark we had an exhibition of medieval weaponry, right? And of course they had found some Stone Age longbows, and they had them on display, and they were lying there with the curve, and then they wanted to start a project where they were going to try and do experimental archaeology. So they wanted to remake these bows from the finds, right? From the archaeological finds. So they built these bows, and then they tested them. And what happened was that they had an effective pull of something like 25 pounds, I think. No, kilos. That's 40 pounds, right? They were useless. They were totally useless. But they were useless because the archaeologists did not have any knowledge or experience with bows. They were trying.
They also wouldn't have had the same level of strength as well.
Yeah, but the point comes now, right? When you find a bow and it lies there without the string, it's gonna curve like this, but it curves counter to the way that you nook it.
Got you, yeah.
And the archaeologists didn't understand this.
Incredible, isn't it? Yeah.
So they had just created a totally useless bow, and then from live reenactment people, right? That's basically kind of like the role-playing crowd of the grown-up version of role-playing people, right? There was one of the British men-at-arms that had been doing a reenactment and recreation of weaponry and trying to rebuild the traditional weapons. They found that when they then took that bow from the Stone Age find and they turned it the right side and then tried shooting it, it doubled in pull. And that means that they could then test it, and it would penetrate a piece of chainmail all the way through a whole pig, and almost through the chainmail on the other side.
It was the technique, yeah.
So it was just a technical thing. It was the understanding of the nature of making bows that they did not have at the archaeological department. And this is the same thing. You cannot sit there and write about psychopaths until you've experienced them. You can maybe get someone that they caught, which is a very special case, right? And you can sit there and you can start doing interviews, and he will fill you up with a lot of bollocks, right? But you have to experience them in the wild. You can't say anything about wolf behavior by watching your
Discovery Channel.
You have to experience it yourself, and you can't do analysis of a wolf or wolf behavior by using a domesticated dog. That makes no sense.
Yes, and not only would an academic be dealing with the bullshit and the lies from the psychopath he's studying, but he'll also won't experience the chemical changes in his body, the changes in his physiology, his metabolism that's caused by being around these types. And that's what makes the experience completely different than anything else, because it literally rewires you in so many different ways. And it's like, how do you know when you've met a psychopath? Well, you just fucking know. It's like that kind of thing. There's no half measure there. Something different has happened here.
You will die.
This is not the same. This is not the human experience that I'm confronting right now. There's something more,
It's what's so important about the way that you coin the phrase predator, that you call them a predator, because that's exactly what they are. Whether they kill you in the body or in the spirit, it doesn't really matter. What they do is they are predatory species. They kill you in some way, and this is their goal. And you can't even say, well, why do they do it? Well, why do predators kill animals? It's to feed, and a psychopath must feed. And as you've explained, if you don't have the same empathic ability, then you need to act on it instead to get any form of emotional experience.
I'll give you an example there of something I thought, and that's spot on what you said, an emotional experience. I just thought about something very psychopathic there the other day that I hadn't noticed before, but it's pretty obvious now. It's one of these things that pops into your head. It says, it's so obvious. I can always remember watching these like born-again Christian types, these like holy roller, Bible-thumping, Pentecostal Christian types, and they'd be always talking about, we must include the Christian dogma, or we must include biblical ideas enshrined within legal, statutory, governmental framework. We can't have a separation of church and state. And they would always follow this by saying, if we take the Bible out of society, or we take it out of the schools, how will people then learn morality and empathy? And that is such a revealing statement, because what these people are basically telling me right there and then is that they're psychopaths and they have no inherent notion of morality and empathy, and they literally do need a rule book. And then they project that psychopathic aspect of themselves onto the rest of society by saying, we must have a Christian society. It's amazing, isn't it? But that's what you're dealing with.
It's so amazing that you mentioned this, because this is the intention that I really wanted to talk to you. It's that I was watching a new documentary about the witch's hammer. The Malleus Maleficarum. That was basically the handbook in finding witches and convicting them, right? The point was that the behavior of writing that book is exactly what you just touched upon. That was exactly what he did. He wrote these moral guidelines to root out or to root out some sort of wrong moral behavior. But he himself did not have a moral core.
Exactly.
So and what really struck me was what you told me when we talked last about how indigenous people, what I will call natural people or the pagans, they would find them themselves and they would deal with them themselves. And then what happens to a society that gets kind of raped by a new culture, so they are not able to use their traditional, what I will call medicine or methods of finding these things. So what Christianity really did, right, to the pagan society was that they took out the natural behavior of people. So they didn't have an immune system anymore. They didn't have any defenses. It's like what happens in national parks. If you don't have an apex predator, the other predators will start killing everything.
Yeah, yeah.
It's so weird, because I was then watching two other documentaries, one about the wolf in Yellowstone Park and another one about the predators of the sea. And the whole term predation is so important right now. It's so important that we understand what it is, and that it actually might explain what went wrong in human society. Because we let the predators loose.
That's what happened. That's the secret. That's, you know, you have all this stuff among the sort of New Age heads and the conspiracy theories of when did humanity go wrong? Did an asteroid hit the Earth so many millions of years ago? Was there a great flood? Did Atlantis sink at the bottom of the sea? Did aliens come and change our DNA? And I think the answer is, what happened was, somewhere along the line, the psychopaths became feral.
Yeah, but what must have happened was that he somehow, his nature, he must have had some sort of opportunity that was not there before, and I think it must have started with urbanization.
Yeah, well, and agriculture. The English Enclosure Act in the 12th century, it's a very interesting turning point in world history. What happened was that this is where all the green patchwork fields in this part of the world come from. They come from the English Enclosure Act. I think it was Richard II was the king at the time. But basically it was, you had a very different kind of sort of rural society in England. You'd have like sort of casual farming. Oh, a nice meadow there, we'll plant some wheat, and there's some woods there, we'll collect the blackberries from there, we'll kill the odd boar, we'll trap a few bunny rabbits and squirrels, there's a stream down there, we can throw up some fish cages, catch a few salmon. And it was very, very, it was a very sort of almost like free-form, improvised form of agriculture. The standards of living, the standards of the health of the people shown through their dental records of bodies found was very high. Then somebody came up with the idea of the Enclosure Act, which is what they basically did was they decided to split up the countryside into what they called manageable sort of hedgerow covered fields, where the peasantry, which is basically would exist to toil in the fields, and then from that they would get a subsistence living from the actual overall agricultural yield of the fields. And then this coincided with laws against poaching. They couldn't trap rabbits, they couldn't hunt deer. In some parts, some lords wouldn't even let them collect blackberries and you know what.
I think
like
that's
that.
the key. I think that's the key.
Yeah.
You are so much on the right core of the problem. Because when I look back at what I know about history, I think it's in what you touched upon with its law. It is the written law. Because when I look at behavior in an animal in the animal kingdom, right, in a wolf pack, what you usually have is you have a hierarchy, and then you have your alpha, which is the strongest, and you can. There would be a lot of things pointing to the fact that the alpha is kind of like the psychopath to some extent. And what usually happens is that you have a...
However, the alpha will defend the tribe as a whole.
Yes, of course. Yes, of course.
So that's different.
But
that's a fundamental difference there.
But I think a psychopath that comes to power will at least enact that anyways. Let me get to the point. There's always a beta, which is the defender of the alpha, but it is also the defender or the peacekeeper, because it also keeps the alpha from dominating and stressing the rest of the group. This is a well-known fact that most people that know about wolves will tell you. The beta will always be the peacemaker, right? And if we take that image and put it on human society, if human society might have worked like that in pagan days, right? That there would be a leader and a peacekeeper, a chieftain and a witch doctor or shaman, right?
Yeah. The shaman would be the sort of the philosophical guardian.
Yes, and this is also mentioned in classical Greek philosophy, because they are trying to rebuild after the whole warring tribal state. But what happens is that written law comes into being. I think it's the written law, because if you have a written law, if you have written shamanistic traditions, right, then that kind of takes the place of the natural peacekeeper. You can take him out. He doesn't have to be a good peacekeeper, because you're peacekeeping with a law.
Yeah. Now, and also that's why you didn't need reading. Like they'll always these classical scholars will always talk about how the Celtic and the Germanic tribes didn't have writing, and we're talking about like a vast amount of Europe here, stretching from the Danube right across to where I'm right now, right? There was no writing. They didn't need it because they had this repository of oral tradition, and this in some ways is far more safer when you have an oral tradition than when you have a statutory document that's legally binding. Once you have that, you have control. That's why you think the Romans went around to like the most remote parts of Europe holding, the fasci. This is just the law, the law. And you see, like today, as basically the psychopathic control system is breaking down, where is it being manifested more and more? In laws. The EU are constantly passing new laws. The United States is constantly passing new laws. Police officers are now being more and more militarized. They're more like the Judge Dredd character from the old comic. They're really more like a sort of a paramilitary force masquerading as policemen. And this is a collective nervous breakdown of the psychopathic control grid in Western society. And they're running to the one thing that's always protected them, the law.
Yeah, but the point is that the law is no longer capable, because when you put things into only paragraphs and into words, if there is no interpreter of the law, if there is not a judge with a heart and a moral code, right? If there is no shaman to actually make the choice, then it becomes Napoleonic law. Then it becomes everything is illegal unless I say otherwise.
Yes.
It's how psychopathic rules happen, right? Because you will have a psychopath or a dominant, extremely dominant leader, and you will not have that beta character in the shape or form of a judge or a priest. This is the whole key. It is the fact that we do not have a two-sided system anymore. There's just one.
Well, one place they do is, I've actually been studying a bit recently, is Sharia law in the Islamic world. They have a very interesting approach. Now, we always hear the most negative things of that for propaganda reasons, actually, of women having their heads chopped off because they had a boyfriend and stuff. But on the everyday day-to-day working level, Sharia law does work between a sort of a mediation between the perpetrator, the victim. Now, I'd be talking about in terms of like say family disputes, those kinds of things, or even business disputes. mediation between the legal structure of the state, the police, the Islamic structure, the Sharia structure of the imams, and the mediation between them. And that would coincide with a mediation between the perpetrator and the victim. And what it basically comes down to is a common understanding that all four can work towards in order to settle the problem. And to me, that is probably not very close, but probably the nearest thing we have today to what happened in pagan societies. I would imagine it was more like that.
And I think you are so much fucking on point with this, because this also proves that there are two forces opposing each other. Because what happened with Christian and pagan society, right? How Christians totally rooted out paganism and the natural laws. This is exactly the same that's happening with the modern Western culture's attempt to root out Sharia law. Because if you look at it, and this is, I think, is key. I know that in Muslim society and culture, there's a lot of things that are not something that I would support. But if you look at the key in relation to psychopathy, what you touched upon is the fact that it is a society predator with a very high libido, extremely sexually oriented, right? And yes, with no moral code. This is the key. So a psychopathic society would want women to be promiscuous. Yeah. Because they don't give a shit. They don't care about the fact that there's always someone getting hurt. They don't care about the fact that the kids will be suffering. A psychopath won't care about these things. But traditional natural society would want to put in checks and balances to make sure that these things do not happen, because there's always someone getting hurt. There's always something being destroyed if we do not control our urges. So Sharia law is more natural in that it is trying to say, well, try to control sexuality at least so it doesn't hurt anyone.
No, I totally agree. It's very the psychopath's obsession with sexuality is completely mirrored in what we call culture today, and you almost get the impression now. Growing up here, and I know Denmark is very liberal and always has been very liberal, but it was a tremendous education growing up here in Ireland, being the age I am, and seeing that transition from a sort of what they would call a conservative society to a very liberal society now. And you know, back in the old days, you know, it's not that people didn't have sex; they did. You know, they did. Everybody was fucking somebody even back then. But there was it was almost like there was a sacredness to the sexual act, that it was so, I wouldn't say it was the taboo thing that put it off, but it was almost like that if you found someone that you loved and you were very attracted to each other, well, the sexual encounters you would have with that person within that sort of cultural framework could be just beautiful and magical and just enchanting, and you can understand why those in the Victorian age that gave birth to the most beautiful poetry and literature. And when you transcend from that to a very liberal, open society, and you can basically, you know, buy somebody a beer and have sex with them, that magic has been lost. That beauty has been sacrificed, and so there's a lot to be said for self-regulation of your sexuality. In that sense, because I think a lot of people are growing up now in the Western world who just don't understand the concept of a sacred sexual union. And I'm not talking about religion here. I'm talking about that incredible sort of sense of bonding that two people can have. It doesn't exist for many people now. It's both, and it's tragic. It's tragic. And what's happening is they're being turned into how psychopaths view sex. Psychopaths don't view sex like that. To them, it's a power trip. It's something to do.
And I think it's two parts, the way I view it. It's the this mind thing. It's the ecstasy, right? The classical term ecstasy. Because sexuality is something that is outside of normal life when it's done right. Eroticism, romance, sexuality. It does not belong in everyday life. It's that is why it's sacred. It belongs at specific times, specific points in life. You don't have to plan it, but you need to make sure that you understand that there's a difference between being in that state of mind and your natural everyday life. You can't really mix the two. And the other part is about the practical union and the intimacy. The fact that you can join with another human being, share something that binds you together, not just in spirit, but if you are lucky, also in flesh, because you will have progeny, and that will be your marriage bond. You do not need a ring on your finger. The fact that there is something running around that's half of each from that union, that is enough.
Yeah, and the whole idea of the penis, I was talking to somebody, the penis and the vagina, and it came up in relation to the issue of male circumcision in the United States. I don't know if you know this, but most men, infant boys in America, are circumcised at birth, and there's now a huge push by mothers, particularly in the US, to have this circumcision stopped, because it's an absolutely barbaric thing. It serves no real medical purpose whatsoever.
Mental. It serves a mental purpose.
Yes, it causes a form of psychological dissociative identity
First
disorder.
of all, you get violated, and second of all, you lose some of your sensation. And if you look at it that way, right, it's numbing the person.
It's a desensitizing agent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's important. I was just watching the Stefan Molyneux topic where he's talking about nurture and caressing and how violence versus nurture, right? If you become violated at some point in your childhood, you will not be able to feel pleasure the same way ever again. You become damaged goods, right? So when you desensitize, and they've just brought in a new rule in Denmark that you are not allowed to, that kids are not allowed to have child sexuality games. They're not allowed to do those sexual playful things that they do.
What? Like what?
Well, when prepubescent kids experiment with sex.
I'll show you yours. You show me mine, kind of thing.
Things like that, and
they touch the little boys. That's now banned.
That is banned now. They're not allowed to do that. They are supposed to stop kids from doing that.
But that's how they build gender identity.
Exactly, and the point is that means that this is just more desensitization of the kids. This is just making.
Like that story. Yeah, okay, gotcha. Now it's like that story in Sweden where they have the genderless preschools now.
Yes, and you are just totally taking out sexuality, taking out physical contact, taking out empathy or asserting your own sexuality.
Yep, yeah, and it's this is all transhumanism. That's what this is all heading for.
Totally.
That's what they're aiming for. Transhumanism is the whole the machine won't have any sexuality. This is why so many psychopaths are obsessed with transhumanism. They see it as on the next stage. I choose transhumanism because I choose to win. All this crap. And that's all that is about. The first thing you have to do is, if you want to implement a transhumanist globalist society, first thing you do is you kill the traditions, you kill the cultures, you kill the religions, you kill the national identities. The next thing you do is then you kill these the social archetypes within the society, the family structure, the sexual identity, the sexuality even the internal relationship between mother, father, son, daughter, brother, sister. Once you break that up, everyone is then dependent upon the state, and then you can create your brand human towards the transhumanist model, and then they can have the transubstantiation of the human with the machine into the techno-Christ. And that's another thing that's very interesting as well. And I've yet to get, I have arguments with transhumanists now and again, and for all their talk about how scientific and technical they are, you realise how stupid many of them are. They've no sense of imagination or vision. I was talking to one of them and I was saying, okay, you become half machine, right? You're no longer a human being, right? What happens to your human rights? If you're no longer a human being, you will no longer be able to abide by human rights. And that's another thing they're pushing for, because they're going to implement statutes and laws where if you're only a certain amount of a human being, then human rights no longer apply to you, and therefore they can do whatever they want with you.
Yeah, this is about ownership and making you a machine that can be owned like chattels. What I would like to point out is the movie The Highlander, right? After I started looking into all these things again, inspired by your work, that movie suddenly made more sense, because what you said about how psychopaths are solitary killers, right? There can be only one.
Yeah.
This also brings about the fact that all these changes, all these goals that we're talking about now, like transhumanism or socialism or communism or feudalism, whatever it is, whatever ism we're talking about, it is a system that a psychopath wants so they can govern.
Yeah.
That is
right.
the whole key point. It's not that it's not all psychopaths want transhumanism. They want something where they can control their world.
And the same with all these machine communities like the Venus Project and the Zeitgeist movement. It's all psychopathic. It's the same thing. One person holding the switch. And the same thing that drives these guys in the White House that expression we grew up during the Cold War. You know, the old man with his finger on the button. That appeals no end to psychopaths. They love that idea. I have a switch on my desk where I can end the world, you know?
But have you noticed one thing? Because it got me thinking, right? If psychopathy is somehow hereditary, right? Or somehow something that can be induced either by direct heritage or by epigenetics or something like that. What I've noticed is that this could also explain a lot of the current problems with autism and Asperger's syndrome. It's not that they're psychopaths. It's just that the same loss of empathy, the same reduction in empathy. They're not feral, but they don't have the empathy.
Well, I don't understand where all this autism is coming from. And it's a very different kind of autism. Like, I can remember when I was a teenager, if a baby was born autistic, you could look at the kid as soon as it was born, and you knew something just wasn't right there. You know, it now seems that the kids are like, they're okay for a couple of months. They're starting to say, they're starting to start using baby talk and use words. They're alert, and then suddenly they're autistic. I mean, this is what I don't understand. It seems to be that the latest autism, whatever it's being caused autistic now, it seems to be not only epidemic, but happening, up to months and months after the baby is born. That's what I don't get.
Well, of course, that could bring us into a whole lot of conspiracy theory. But if empathy is a detector of the predator, right? If this is the only way that you can detect the predator, a well-developed empathy, then if I was a predator, I would try to make sure that they couldn't detect me. You've seen the movie They Live.
Yeah,
where it's symbolized by the glasses. When he
yeah,
puts on the sunglasses, then he can see them.
yeah,
Right? It's the box with empathy in it. Without that box, you cannot detect them. They are
yeah.
invisible. It is always the same story being told all through history. Apparently, I was
Well,
also
that's what puzzling people is about. I wrote puzzling people to be like those glasses. I'll tell you. I'm going to make a confession to you right now. There are two psychopaths. You know what? I tell people to have no contact ever again. There are two people in my life, on the periphery of my life now, that I know. Don't know I've written the book and don't know anything about me other than some guy who lives down the road, who I absolutely know are both psychopaths, but I keep them around me casually as almost like control specimens. I use them to see how they react to certain social changes, certain, just even I've even actually seasonal changes. I have this new anecdotal body of evidence that's building that there are certain times of year when the psychopathic frenzy becomes more active. But these people have not known I've written the book. I have not changed my demeanour about them. However, I'm finding it more and more difficult to have them stay in my company for any more than a minute. So it's almost like they know, I know, and the only time I got one of them to say to me recently was a cloud drink in the pub one night. I was buying pints of beer on night, and I was drinking soft drinks, and I just wanted to watch him, and I was just pretending that I casually walked into the pub and there he was. But I went in with this specific thing to actually study him. That this guy, as he got more and more drunk, his psychopathic tendencies came more and more out, to the point where he started saying things like, everybody in this town thinks I'm a complete cunt, but let me tell you, I'm smarter than all of them. And inside of me, I feel perfect. I feel perfect. I can't explain it. I was drunk when he said this, but I feel perfect. I feel like I'm better than anyone, and I can do anything. And when you hear this one, Jakob, then he says to me, you know what I feel like? I feel like a puzzle. And I can put all the pieces, that's the actual term he used, I feel like a puzzle, and I can put, like a jigsaw puzzle, and I put all the pieces together, and I know I'm fucking great. Can you believe that?
yeah, it's just
There was nothing about the guy who lives up the road. So I'm sort of violating the no contact thing, but it's just purely because I can handle it now. I can deal with them. Now I'm on to the next level, what to do with them. Because as you brought up, there are things I'm starting to building a body of anecdotal evidence on, in terms of they seem to be very, very controlled by natural forces in the world. I'm talking about, natural cycles like seasonal cycles and so on. They seem to always embark on their psychopathic rampages in spring. This is when they either come out the closet, devastate people, or move on to their next target.
well.
That they can root all winter long.
You've coined it with the predatory behavior, right? That's also when predators go crazy, because that's when there's young ones.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's like the way certain viruses don't become active until the weather is warm.
Yeah, but and there's not an abundance of either weakened old ones from the former season, or new young ones. These are the periods that a psychopath would come out. I would also expect them to kind of go on a rampage in and around winter time, really, early winter.
November. No, these people have been writing me saying to me that they've done things like commit murders, or commit their main fraud. It seems to be that the deception and the lies and the manipulation happens in spring, and the attack happens in late autumn, early winter.
Yes.
It's the strangest thing.
No, it makes sense. That's when.
No, it does make sense, because they're an animal. They're really like an animal. So
Whoa.
Place.
Oh, we're falling out. Hang on.
Grooming their next target, which they would pounce in on the following spring. It's just fascinating how this is all coming out now. How they're actually, there's actually traits. This is when they start boasting about how smart and clever they are, and how they're the next stage in evolution. But they're still, in terms of their behaviour, in the wild. You know, they're a step backwards, really. You know, they haven't learned how to work with nature. They've learned how to. They're still completely dominated by it.
Yeah, they are just following their natural urges, and this is really where I was seriously seeing your work going into. I don't know if I can call it a revival or a rediscovery of the ancient understanding, right? The actual meaning behind the myth, right? Because being where you are, you have the best resource material ready at your hands to figure out what the whole thing about paganism is. Because when you explain things like psychopathy, and I will go so far and say the opposite is also true. The empath, the shaman, right? The magical indigo children, whatever you call them, right? They are the opposite spectra of the human psyche, right? And when I listen to old myth from Ireland and England about the Fae, this is exactly what it's about. The two courts, right? The She, where you have the two branches. One is malicious and evil doing, and the other is trickster-like but benevolent.
Yeah, they're not up to any. They're not. They're very alive. Their trickster behavior. It tells you of their creativity and their imagination.
Exactly,
you know,
and this is what
it's an insight into that, and it's like what the Buddhists say: wisdom and compassion is the same thing. You know, it's true.
And especially because I think it was actually in Ireland, I think it was in Kilkenny or something, where they had a comedy festival.
A comedy festival, yeah.
It's just that the whole trickster thing, right? The benevolent fae.
Yeah.
It's the Sealy Court.
Gotcha. Yeah.
That's what you see when you sit and watch comedy. When you see stand-up comedians, when you see a one of the comedies by Shakespeare, right? This is what the trickster, the empath is. Yes, they can be disruptive, but only in a benevolent way. It is with a good purpose.
Well, if you look at the tarot, the Fool card, he's off on his journey of his dreams, but he's sort of like he's the fool, but also his naivety is very charming about him. There's a dog stealing his lunch out of his pocket, and he's walking towards a cliff. But that's also in itself, it requires an element of bravery. For in order for you to reach your true potential, you must cast off your predetermined and your presumptions about the inherent dangers that may come ahead. And that's where comedy comes from. It takes a hell of a lot of I'm a very funny guy, and I like humor. I love jokes, and that's my day-to-day persona. And I find there's something very spiritual in laughter and within humor. And I look at the tarot card of the Fool. You know, he's zero on the tarot deck. But he also represents the 2 points of a circle coming back to completion, because he's also, because he's zero, he's also the end and he's also the beginning and the end of the deck. And that his journey is the journey of life, really back to the innocence of himself. And that's also a metaphor for our society. We've gone through the major arcana of, you know, the tower, the devil, and all the, you know, the temperance and all the challenges along the way, and we're trying to get back to the fool that we were, that innocent child. And I see that and you see, well, why do you think so many comedians are so insightful? People like Bill Hicks, people like Steve Hughes. I mean, these are comedians that really, really have something to say beyond jokes. You know,
oh, yes.
There's an inherent
it's not about humor. It's about teaching, no. But teaching through humor.
It's about holding the mirror up to the world and saying, "Look how absurd you are."
Yes. And
we as normal, empathic, non-disordered people, when we see ourselves in the mirror, we burst out laughing. When the psychopath sees itself in the mirror, it's repulsed.
Yes. And it's funny.
And that's what the vampire, the allegory of not only the vampire but many Celtic mythologies of the evil fairy or the evil entity does not want to see its reflection.
Exactly, and this is also key. If you look at the traditional stories, right, the fairy tales, it's always about these battles between the courts, right, and it's always about how evil always loses in the end. This is not just about the fact that it's a fairy tale. It's about the fact that evil is self-destructive. It cannot win.
It's not evolutionary. It has no ability to create. It's deception. Manipulation and deception is not the same thing as imagination and creativity. It cannot create. It can only recycle. And that's another thing too. It makes me wonder why so many of these psychopaths in power are obsessed with things like recycling, and you know, and they claim it's all environmental and everything, but it's almost like it's an insight into their psychology as well, that they're obsessed with this thing called sustainability. Whatever happened to creativity? They can't create, so they sustain. So they're obsessed with sustainability. They're not obsessed with innovation and creativity because it's completely foreign to them.
And one thing that I thought about is when you look at the vampire myth and the werewolf myth, and there's always the secret to the whole problem. It's always out there in the open if you know how to look for it. It's about how psychopathic or predatory existence cannot win. You cannot have a planet only with predators. You cannot have a society with only predatory behavior. What happens if that goal is reached is that everything breaks down, or the psychopath needs to change into a butterfly, right?
Well,
like with the Highlander thing. Yeah. He becomes human, right? When he wins, he becomes human. Because he's the last one, that means that he changes. There's no more psychopathy at all in him.
Yep.
So, and the same with the transition in vampire stories. It's always about finding the cure.
Yep.
Because you cannot have a society where everyone is a vampire. That would just be, there would be no food.
Well, it's beautifully shown in that movie, The Wicker Man, where as the food is, you know, each year the crops are failing because their strains are failing. And each year they increase the sacrifices. And Edward Woodward, who you're supposed to almost, at the beginning of the movie, see as this sort of, it's actually a beautiful movie, as this sort of like obnoxious Christian, stubborn, closed-minded guy and all this. But yet, it's a beautiful story of a man's unconditional love, a hardcore Christian man's unconditional empathic love for an innocent pagan child that wins the day. Because even though he burns at the end of the film, he points the finger at Lord Summerisle and he says, your strains have failed because your crops have failed. And it doesn't matter how many sacrifice, but only next year, if they fail again, only the King of Summerisle will be a worthy enough sacrifice. And the look on Christopher Lee's face then is like, you can just see he called his bluff, because this humble police sergeant who was driven by nothing else. He was not driven by his Christian fanaticism. He was not driven by his hatred of paganism. He was driven by his empathic concern and compassion for an innocent child, which into his fate would have been, you know, an evil child, but he didn't see it. He saw it as an innocent child. And as he went through this progression, and he ended up as the fool, but at the very end, the fool pointed at the king and brought him down. And with that, he planted that one seed in the mind of that entire community. And, you know, Lord Summerall knew he was finished. And that film is a phenomenal metaphor in that regard.
Also, the
passion transcends dogma, all dogma.
But there's another level, right? Hang on, I need a bio break. 2 seconds.
Joel, what were you going to say? Sorry.
Oh yeah, it's just that I also saw another detail in that movie. The fact that he's a constabulary, that he's a policeman, that he is representing a sort of dominant society, and in the king being in a king or the law being sacrificed, the only next victim or target will be the psychopath.
Yeah, that's absolutely spot on. Yep, it's a phenomenally deep film on that level.
And that's really key about what paganism is, and the whole thing about why this ritual is redone over and over again, about explaining what happens when you don't kill the predator to kill them. You kill, or rather someone gets killed or sacrificed so the predator can die, because you cannot kill them. You can only kill them by taking away their food source.
Because there's nothing under the surface. They're a hollow shell. And everything, they're completely dependent upon the exterior food source, this vampiric nature they have. But ultimately there's nothing in there. They're in completely, what's the word, dependence. They always need enablers, and as soon as the enablers dry up, they're gone, they're finished.
But they are, as you mentioned, right, they do have a very, very important purpose in nature. Not just in the natural world, in the case of apex predators like the wolf or the killer whale or things like that. In human society, as you pointed out, they have a transformative function, right? Some people, right, are in a weakened spiritual state. To be able to transition from that into something bigger, they need to be killed.
Say that again. Who needs to be killed?
Well, if I am in a spiritual weakened state, right?
Yeah.
I have to either be rebuilt, but it is an easier transition to let myself be killed.
Yeah, and that's what comes down to this whole transhumanism. But back to that thing again. Rather than to teach us how to react and be revulsed by the psychopathic control grid, to bring us to the next layer of evolution through a reactive process to the degradation they cause. They want to make us believe that we're spiritually dead, that there's nothing worth saving, and the best thing of all would be to just give in and let them replace us with machines or wipe us all out to save the earth. And they've been doing this for a long time. This whole thing of taking away our soul. I found this book, this school book. When I was a little kid, I had this book. This is from the 70s, right? And it's called What to Look For Inside a Church, right? What to Look For Inside a Church.
That's a children's book.
Yeah.
Oh my
yeah.
God.
What to look for inside a church, and it shows like all the technical and architectural details, the naves, the altar, right? The one thing it doesn't mention you should look for in a church is God, and that tells you everything you need to know about the psychopathic approach to life. The purpose of a church is to house the trappings of religion, but not to house the trappings of the eternal. And that, to me, sums them up perfectly. What to look for inside a human being is flesh, blood, bones, sinews, viscera, but not the internal personality. And that's why they're obsessed with these artists who, excuse me a second, these artists who do things like chop up human bodies and stuff like that, and open the skin up. So psychopaths love those kind of artists who could, take dead bodies of executed Chinese prisoners and peel back the skin, and they talk about how it's interesting and fascinating how the body works, and it is, but they miss the one important aspect, that there used to be a person in there.
It's funny. I was just watching this morning a very old Walt Disney cartoon with Donald Duck, where he's being introduced to Pythagorean thought and how everything is math. This would be the difference between...
I've seen that cartoon, it's very good.
Again, this is the difference between what I would call a functional psychopath and a destructive psychopath. What you just pointed out, right? Because deconstructing things and understanding things, that's a useful thing, right? But if you let them roam free, they will cut up your pets, they will kill your population, they will they will become Dr. Mengele, right? Instead of being a source of good.
Yeah.
But if they get to fill the shoes that they are destined to have, right? If they focus on what they are supposed to do, giving us an opportunity of transformation when we need it, figuring out how things work, right? Teaching us how there must always be some sort of governance, right? But it has to be benevolent. It has to be with the heart, and the heart cannot be the same person.
Mm.
It's just so weird that, because you can sit there and look at a flower and you can say, well, I can see the math, but then you're not seeing the flower.
Yeah, exactly. You can look at it. You can look at a beautiful natural forest and you can see construction timbers, or you can look at a natural forest and see the incredible ecosystem that it is within itself. It's the same thing, and all the life it sustains. That's why it's obvious when we came to that schism, bang, when the Native Americans met the European settlers. The Europeans saw the European psychopathic control system, not necessarily the immigrants or any of the people that went over, but the psychopathic system that they were the representatives of, saw the North American continent as purely a resource base. Isn't that interesting now? A resource base to be plundered. And the Native Americans were quite different in their regard. They couldn't understand how you could actually buy and sell land. You had to win land as warriors or stuff like that. They had a very different attitude. But what was I going to say? That schism came about directly, and that genocide came about directly because of the publication of Charles Darwin's The Origins of Species, the Native American genocide. I'm talking about the North American one. The first real, purposeful, scientifically undertaken genocide happened as a result of Darwinian thought entering the mainstream. Not as even a biological or a scientific work, but as a philosophical mandate. And that's the difference. A normal person would read the Origin of Species and say to themselves, that's fantastic. There is an underlying intelligence towards how humans, how the natural order takes place. There is a brilliant fluidity towards how society happens. Where a psychopathic individual would read it and say, that's my legal statute for wiping out that inferior group, or sterilizing these people, or tampering with this kind of thing. It gives me a chance to play God. And that's exactly how, this is why psychopaths are obsessed with Darwinian evolution, because they see it as a mandate to do what they want to do when they get into power, from sterilization to genocide.
And what's really so funny about the way that you've explained this is it comes back to the puzzle. They need to have a puzzle that can be solved. They need to have an explanation that can be found. They are chasing their own tail. They are trying to analyze everything by number or behavior or rules or repetition. They do not see that things are not a puzzle, that they are a natural process. And why I believe this is relevant is, if you look at any of the writings about pagan society and about the natural state of human beings, one thing that you will find is that they did not have anxieties.
No, like animals don't have anxieties.
They will have fear, but they cannot have fear of something that's not there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly it. Anxiety is a scientific process that's been used to control us. If you take away all the anxieties of modern the average modern person in a Western society, 99% of his anxieties are completely invented.
Yes, and what's really relevant is that every time I hear this discussed, they talk about fear, but it's not fear; it's anxiety, and there's a fucking huge difference. Fear is being afraid that predator will eat me. Anxiety is being afraid that something is going to eat me.
Yes, and fear is fear, and this is okay. You want to get down to the crux of my work here. Fear gives you the impetus to develop creative, philosophical, spiritual, scientific, emotional, and psychological weaponry and solutions to escape the fear. Anxiety, because the actual fear is not real, therefore the solutions to escape that anxiety will either never be attained or will be dependent upon solutions that are handed to you from third-party sources who put you in that state of anxiety to begin with. And that's extremely important. I'm glad you brought that up.
And
fear and anxiety have nothing to do with each other.
And it's so key to everything that we have to move into. It's just a natural development, right? Because the anxiety that they are causing, it's also a mechanism that's being used in the animal kingdom, right? Because you will have predators that use distraction and diversion, and they use things like the rattlesnake, right?
Or the fish that looks like it's more dangerous than it is. Yeah.
There's plenty.
Or the moth that looks like the eyes of an owl, or a dangerous bird of prey.
Yes, and it's all about putting you in a position where you are not able to react.
Yeah.
They are working on anxiety. It's not about fear, because fear would just make you either fight or flee. That's what fear does. Fear makes you strong. Fear gives you wings, right? If you remember the isn't it the Asterix album about teach us what fear is so we can get wings so we can fly.
Yeah.
and also the fact that because fear is a cause of action and anxiety is something that freezes you, then freezing you is very useful for a predator. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
You will be more successful. And what the human predatory system is doing is using all these tools to stop us from being able to act.
Exactly, and that's what everything from transhumanism, the Venus Project, advertising, the hypersexualization of Western society, it's all about creating anxieties that pin us down in a certain place, in a certain status, and as long as we're pinned down, we're easier to manage. That's what the purpose of anxiety is, and and also it's good for business. There's a whole industry built upon relief of these anxieties, which it's really quite frightening what's been done to people. This is why I'm a big sort of advocate of this whole, like we were talking about that fearmonger Alex Jones earlier on in his Freudian slip. This whole thing of like, wake up, we gotta wake people up. Again, it's taking away the personal journey that the person has to find upon themselves.
Yes.
And if you're rattling someone going, wake up, wake the sheeps up, wake the dumb plebs up, what you're doing is you're enforcing a form of fascism on them. You're imposing your will on them.
Yes.
It's not your job to do that, and that's wrong in two ways. One, you're infringing on that person's sovereignty, and two, you're robbing yourself of the solution to do something about it yourself, because you're too busy being an evangelical, what they call truthers or whatever they call them. And that's the reason why they exist. These Pied Pipers like Alex Jones is to trap you in, to bring you a little bit further, but not to your full potential. You're still in the chrysalis. You have not emerged into the butterfly state yet, because the final, no butterfly or moth is taken out of the chrysalis by another butterfly or a moth. They emerge by their own free will, and this is all about free will, stifling at every level, but also the self-entrapment, the self bondage to the people who claim that they're on some kind of a path of enlightenment, whether it be in a religion or whatever, and they're not really. All they've done is push themselves to the front of the queue and to hold the others back, or to pretend they're bringing them on, and they're not. They're just jumped to the edge of the line, but they haven't actually gone that one step further. And that's what that's all about. This whole thing of like, the way to find knowledge is to stumble upon the information, and when that seed is planted in there, if you don't react to that, that's your free will. However, if you are ready for a transformative personal process, if you're ready for a psychological, I won't say upgrade, but a psychological,
Change.
Flourishing, change, you alone must take that step. You must be like Jesus, come for the 40 days in the wilderness. You have to do this. It's not all ethnic tradition, all folk tradition have stories of the hero who went out on their own and had that transformative journey on their own. And it's caught because that's the parable. You have to do this alone.
This brings me to back to the tarot, because I wanted to touch upon the whole thing about on your own and of your own free will, and how they keep trying to implement new ways and systems of obfuscation, of mesmerizing, brainwashing, right? The traditional fortune telling is actually an attempt to brainwash you.
Oh
Because
yeah.
it is you touching the cards, and it's me actually turning them. This
Yes.
is what in sales training, right? You get taught that there's this thing called a cross, where if you are a traveling salesman and you get offered a coffee in the living room, you need to take control and say, no, 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 let's take the coffee in the kitchen. Because once you've taken control, you create the cross, you create the dominance, right? You take over everything. That means, first of all, you've asserted yourself in a dominant position, and then your only goal as a salesman is to make them say yes, yes, yes. It is exactly the same thing being used in cold reading. You need to get people to say yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, it's a confidence trick.
And once you do that, you have taken over their will. You have become a parasite, and you are now not just the parent of them. You are their leader. You are the slave owner. They have to.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And
like when people find out I'm interested in the tarot, and I don't do divination, I don't do readings for other people. I'm purely interested in a psychological and creative toolbox. That's what I use it for.
And that's its point. That's its purpose.
It's that and a game, but I use it for that. To me, it's a handy canon of archetypal Western symbolism that can help me develop a creative solution to many things. That's where it begins, and that's where it ends. But you would be amazed how many people come up to me and say, when I tell them I'm very interested in the tarot, they'll say to me, oh, I got a reading about 10 years ago from a gypsy at the seaside, and I got the tarot card. What does that mean? It's bad, isn't it? They're still the slave of this Sheridan in the caravan who, as you said, took sovereignty of their psychology.
Yes.
And created a slave for all eternity.
And this is also a key to what we are trying to do with our website, right? And with this talk, we do not call it an interview. We call it a dialogue, because if you look at the method that's being used when you look at traditional media, when they turn it into an interview, right, where there's an interviewer asking a lot of questions, being taught or explained something by an expert, by someone that you call, right? The reason they do it like that is they want the viewer to empathize and be the journalist, right? Because if they feel that they are the journalist, they will believe what's being told.
Exactly, yeah.
And
they ask the questions you want to hear.
And it's always like that. It's always one-way communication, and it's always either dominance porn or it's the schoolmaster situation. Every single time. It's never a dialogue. It's never people sitting relaxed and just talking about things. And it's the same when you go to the doctor, when you go to a psychologist. When it's always one-way communication. Of course they can be listening, but then when they talk, they are talking to you as if they're trying to take over your will.
Oh, they are. That's exactly what's happening. You're being made submissive. You're being made submissive to the agenda of the overlord in that situation. And you see that this is why journalism, mainstream journalism today, newspaper journalism, is such a toxic, and actually it always has been, a toxic lifestyle. This is why there's so much alcoholism and drug abuse and all kinds of other problems among like newspaper journalists and media journalists, drug abuse, and it's because there's something inherently unhealthy about their approach, where they're becoming the representative of the listening audience of the readership, in terms of implementing a sort of a false dialogue with the person they're interviewing, and that person there carefully choosing their words so they can talk to this sort of representative of the people who by extension have handed over their sympathy to the journalist. And I can understand why so many journalists and media types and TV people die young. It's a horrific lifestyle because they're not being real. They're being a fake. You know, they're being like the carrier wave, but not the signal inside the carrier wave. You know what I'm saying? Like a radio station broadcasts with a carrier wave. The carrier wave is just a frequency, but ultimately it has no energy. It does not deliver a transmission to the end at the speaker, to the viewer. So it's a wasted life. It's a wasted life of a messenger who serves no purpose. And that's why I've often found, like so many mainstream journalists I've known, they've had terrible problems, family problems, alcoholism, all that stuff. And a lot of it, I think, is rooted in the fact that they're ultimately living a toxic, unfulfilling lifestyle where they're like a pipe, a sewer pipe. All the shit passes through them. And that's the end of it, you know. And that's, I think there's a lot when you talk about that whole thing when people sympathise with the journalists. They're not really. They're just using. Yeah, they are. But the journalist is getting absolutely nothing. The interviewer is absolutely getting nothing from it. So what you're doing here is far more healthy. There's a dialogue because you're speaking as much as I am, and from this interaction of unscripted text and unscripted dialogue, is where ideas and new possibilities manifest. And that's incredibly more healthy.
Exactly, and it's funny because my co-founder commented that in the interview there's a lot of pauses where one of us says the sound, right? Where we're thinking.
That's
thinking, and the point is, this is authentic. This is real. This is like in real conversation. There is no such thing as a totally scripted thing when you are in real life. It is happening at the moment. That means you cannot prepare. You cannot sit there and decide everything. You need to listen before you speak.
Yeah, and ultimately the people who will listen to this stuff going forward will get much more from what we're doing than they'll get from a pre-scripted interview. And that's actually how I wrote Puzzling People as well. I didn't sit down with a framework. I literally started with the first page. I literally typed out what's on the foreword, the introduction there. When the demon knocks at your door, I literally typed those words first. And the last words I typed were at the very end, where I said, don't turn to drugs, alcohol, the rest of the world needs you as you are. And I literally went from beginning of the book to the end. It was not written in stages at all, amalgamated at the end. And that's how, I think that's why the book is appealing to so many people, and they're reading it 2 or 3 times, is because there's they're hearing a story that as if a stranger sat down on a long train journey, and you're the only 2 people on the train, and they said, let me tell you about my life. And that's exactly how I wanted the book to be. And I think that's something I found when I was doing it incredibly powerful for me. I actually think I grew 2 inches from the beginning of that book to the end. I mean, if you look at the early videos of me on YouTube, before when I was starting to write the book, and compare them to now, I'm a different person. It's almost like all this negative energy has just gone out of me, you know. And that comes from being innovative, and that comes from not adhering to the script. And that brings us right back to what you were saying about the law, because the law is there to stop us from having these releases of anxieties. It all comes full circle, doesn't it?
Yes. It's so amazing.
It is. It's always the 2 points in the circle. You always come back to the end, you know.
And this is really interesting because it's only now that we have reached a technology stage where natural communication is possible again.
Yeah.
right? Because of course writing was invented to make things more effective, to have a longer reach in time and space, and as such it makes sense. And the same thing with news media, right? The purpose is to reach more people, right? So it's not that this that it's only bad. It's just that its problem is that it doesn't, it's not real. It's narrative, right? It's like if a stand-up comedian is doing his stand-up, if he was doing that in a studio with no audience, it's not as funny. He does not get a reaction from his audience. And the same with the storyteller. He needs to see if the story is being received.
Same thing with a record. You play a song live in front of people, something happens. You're just taken away to a different place.
Because you're with him. You're doing it together.
You're doing it together.
What's the Irish word for it? In the bars.
Crack?
No, what's it called? When the musicians meet and do those jam sessions, it's got a
session.
Oh, it's just culturally. I think it's got some. It's got a special word. Anyways, the point is that jamming, right? The whole thing about just coming together and everyone can join in. Everyone can join in the song. Everyone can play their instrument if they got one. That is a whole. It's the real thing. It's not a record playing. It's not someone on a stage. I am participating.
And you beautifully segued into a story I'm going to tell you. This is right before I go. It's the the traditional music festivals in town here this week, right? And every single year, since the 10, 11 years I've lived in this town, right? Every single year, this elderly woman comes over from the United States. She lives in a retirement home in Florida. She's 92 years old now. She comes over for the music festival every year, American lady, and she plays the baron. The baron is that circular drum that it's a very it's a difficult instrument to play, but you can get all the sounds of sort of a drum kit out of that, except the cymbals, depending on where you hit it. So, but she's old, so she's not a professional player, but she joins in with this is what's good about these festivals. They have professional musicians with amateurs, and she just taps along to the rhythm, to the beat. And I was talking to her last year when she was 91, and she says she's been coming for 20 years or something like that. I don't know, it was a long time, 15, 20 years, I don't know. She said that every single year, the doctors tell her, do not go, this will be your last trip over. You won't make, you're too old, you won't make it back, right? And she's been told this to the same doctors for years. Not only has she lived longer than the people in that retirement home who came in years ago, who'd come in at 65 and are dead at 67 or 68. She's not only outlived them, but she's outlived all the doctors who gave her that advice. And she says that when she comes over, she plays in those sessions, right? She plays the baron, very simply, and then she goes back. She says she feels a year younger when she left. And she'll be back next year, and she says the doctor will give her the same advice. And she says, banging that drum once a year is what keeps her alive, because it becomes the symbolic heartbeat that her elderly heart is losing. So she has transformed her biological pulmonary system with the banging of a drum, the banging of a goat skin. And in that, she hasn't verbalized it this way, this is my interpretation, she has created an alchemical pathway between the sort of osmosis effect of her heart being transformed into this beating of this baron, and as a result is giving her not only a longer life, but a better quality of life than the people who make fun of her because or tell her that she's too old for it. And there's a lesson in that for all of us, And it's so funny you mentioned that, because she's there. I didn't see her last night, but I saw her walking around town with a drum case. 92 years old, and she's kept alive by once a year travelling 3,000 miles and banging a drum. And if that doesn't give you, if that's not an insight into the power of the human spirit, then nothing is. And that's what the psychopaths are trying to kill. And and that mentality and that approach is the reason why we're going to beat them. And you can have that signed by me, because when you see the human spirit manifesting in a way like that, you know that we are indestructible, and that's ultimately is what's pissing the psychopaths off and why they're trying to bring us down.
That's a perfect place to stop it.
Okay.
I'm just gonna stop.